Hi, Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. I don't know about you, but these last 2 weeks of insanely hot weather had me thinking of the beach. And while we can't really go there right now in person, we can certainly imagine being there and maybe pick even an object to draw that reminds us of that tranquil setting of being seaside. What better to think about doing that than a conch shell? Now you might be thinking those are pretty complex if you're trying to draw a conch shell. And I did print out a picture of a conch shell for you to see here. And yes, there's a lot going on here. But like I said before, everything you draw can be broken down into simpler shapes. So here's my conch shell, and here's my broken down version. This is just the basics, and we're going to certainly fill it in. You can see I numbered them 1 to 5. There's only 5 shapes here, and 4 of them are triangles. So if you can draw a triangle, you can draw a conch shell. So let's get started on our project. When I was showing you this example about the 5 shapes, of course, we're missing a lot of the components of the conch shell, which are all these other little spiky triangles that make the tip of this shell. So first, I'm going to just show you how to lay in those using this simple marker drawing. Then I'm going to go to pencil and give you an example of how to draw this in regular pencil or color pencil. And then, of course, you could always paint it. But we're going to add one more wrinkle, if you will, into the mix today. And that's going small. We've done a lot of drawings that are relatively large, so I thought it might be fun to go tiny. 7 by 7 is my choice today, and you can of course choose whatever size you'd like. You could even go smaller if you want. I know many galleries that dedicate entire exhibits to what they call small works, which are usually images under the size of 8 by 10. Some painters work even smaller than that, like 2 by 3 or teeny tiny with those brushes that have maybe 1 or 2 brush hairs. When we were down in the art studio this week, I was watching Maureen Kammerer work on a very small beach scene. Now, Maureen normally works on very large surfaces, but she shrunk this picture down and I thought it was just stunningly beautiful. And it gave me the idea that while we were doing something simple like a conch shell, why not also go small? And then I thought, why not add a border? Because we haven't done that yet. This way, if you do something small and you finish it with its own little border, you don't have to buy a frame. You could just display it as is. Maybe it's displayed on your refrigerator, or if you make it the right size, use it as a greeting card or a postcard to give to family or friends. Especially in this time of relative isolation, it's nice to get something in the mail or just something under your door that might remind you that you're being thought of by others, or that you are thinking of others. So either way, it'll be fun and it shouldn't be too hard. Whereas I already drew in these basic triangles, and you can try this for yourself. If you want to practice this version of the conch shell, I'll have copies available down in the Art Center. But I drew my basic triangle, which coincides with where this part of the triangle top of the conch shell is. So the only thing I have to think about is drawing a line, coming out a little further, and coming down. Drawing a line, coming out a little further, and coming down. And I'm just repeating this pattern to get my basic shapes in of this conch shell. Maybe I'll do one more right there. Once I've built my lines, I can then go back and add more triangles. It's really not too hard once you get the hang of this, and if you want to use a ruler, by all means, go right ahead. Now, I'm doing this in a big fat marker so that you can see the basic idea of getting this conch shell, but you don't have to use a marker, and that was my number 1. That's not part of it. But now you can see we've got that texture basically lined in for what a conch shell is. And now just looking at the drawing, I'm seeing how this inside kind of has this beautiful light color here. So I can break that down into my plot points of just kind of blocking out where I see that going and then connecting my shapes. Then over here, I can see that this one right here, this little triangle is actually divided in two. So I'll add another one there. And that finishes off that pretty much. And then here, where I see there's a dark shadow and a light, it just means subdividing that triangle and subdividing this one. And pretty much with the example, let's see what we have here. That's the basic idea of a whole conch shell. It's geometric, it's really rough, and it's not where we're headed for the final project, but it's a good way to practice. This will give you the proportions and show you that if you're doing this, especially in pencil and it's light, because it certainly looks a little garish in a big black marker, but in a light colored pencil or regular lead pencil, graphite, it's not that hard. So if you can draw triangles, you can draw a conch shell. Okay, I'm still going to draw a conch shell, but like promised, I'm going to go to a very small, for me anyway, paper size, which is 7 by 7. I also like to work really large, so this will be a challenge for me. And I am just simply tearing some masking tape and just lightly pressing it down along the edges. So as long as you get it right on the edge, we're gonna wind up with this really nice frame. Now you don't have to press it down too hard, just lightly. We're not using this to mask paint. We're just using it so if we decide to color in a background, we've got an area that's gonna create a frame. And the key is to lay your one edge of tape right along the edge of your paper. And again, you can see I'm barely patting this down because I don't wanna tear my paper. If you're using regular computer paper, this might not be the way to go because regular computer paper is extremely lightweight. Paper has weight, and I'm sure you've probably seen 80 pounds, 60 pound, all that thing. It doesn't mean the piece of paper weighs 80 pounds or whatnot. It's going by the ream or how many, the 500 sheets of the paper. So a heavier weight paper also has a higher number of weight. So this paper that I'm drawing on right now, this is 100-pound paper, which isn't all that big because you can get 300-pound, especially watercolorists know that, but it's good enough. And here we are. So I can even leave these tabs on because it's easier to pull off than if I fold them. Remember, we're not trying to make the tape look neat, and this is just an option for you, but I like having things a little more settled, so we're gonna go with that. All right. To start with my conch shell, I'm going to start again with my regular lead pencil, and I'm using a soft lead so that I can see. If you're going small, try to fill up as much of the area as you can. It doesn't matter what you're drawing. Even if you're drawing something as simple as a teacup, just try to make it big enough so that it fills the space. So even though my conch shell is more oblong than it is square, I'm just going to plan accordingly. So I'm drawing in my rough ideas for my triangle parts. And then I'm coming down. If you remember the first drawing lesson that we did contour line drawing. And this is very similar to that. We did a horse. And the whole idea was just to draw the outline shapes that you're seeing of the subject. And then this comes out here. And remember, all good artists talk to themselves, so don't worry about that. And then this kind of comes here. Now I've got a little fatter conch shell than what I'm looking at here, but that's okay because we're gonna taper this in. This becomes the second part here. And if I have some part that I don't like, we've got the handy dandy eraser, because I do want to change this shape and bring it here. And then this is going to have a background. So all I'm doing is drawing my outlines of my shapes. Now here come those fun little triangles we just did. And I'm just going to draw another row. It's almost like drawing a crown. So if you've drawn crowns, even as a child, you know, drawing one of those fun little princess and all those kings and queens and whatnot, castle things that kids like to draw, you've probably drawn a crown of some sort. Maybe you were designing a Halloween costume, but regardless, it works. And now I'm just gonna bring this line more up here because again, it's all about seeing the shapes and it's all about customizing it as you go along. And there's no one perfect conch shell. I have one outside in the garden. It's super huge and it got a little dirty with the rain, or I would have used that as an example. But it has a much rounder shape, so don't worry about that. Anyway, here's our outline for the conch shell. It's very simple. You don't have to do a conch shell, and I'm going to show you at the end of this some other ideas that'll give you things to do. The key to this is it's called a one-item drawing. That means not a lot of other stuff. We're just making one item have a lot of importance. Andy Warhol did that with soup cans. If you ever saw the Campbell soup can picture, one picture of a soup can, and he made it work. So now that I have this drawn in, I'm going to use colored pencil and pretty much follow the shapes and colors that I see here. So where I see the reds, and yes, if you've just looked at that printout and you see there's some lines, I have an Epson printer that's on its last legs, so it's printing a couple of little weird lines, but that's okay. We're just gonna go with that. So what we're gonna do now is rough in just the color. If you wanna work black and white, just interpret this as a middle gray of your pencil. So I would be using, I'll show you here, roughly this tone of gray if you're doing this all in black and white. But I wanted to do color because I just thought it would be a little more fun. And I liked all the pinks on this too. Again, remember, if you take colored pencil and use one color over another and go in a different direction, it'll blend it in more and you won't have that scratchy paper look. Although some people really like that look, and if you do, that is absolutely fine. Down here, I'm going to start making some stripes because when I'm looking at this conch shell, this one must be from a very beautiful tropical island. It has lovely coral colors. I'm taking this coral pink and just making all the little stripy shapes wherever I see them. And the key is to draw them where you see them, not where you think they are, because that's, again, another big difference in what's actually there. And then I see a little bit of that color up here, but not as much, and a little bit here. So if I don't see it, I'm not going to add it in. I'm just trying to basically get the idea of where I see these colors of these pinks. All right, so that's the basic beginning of getting these colors, and I'm going to keep building up some different layers. What I want you to notice is, look at all these shapes down here in the bottom of this picture. Does this remind you of anything? It does me. This reminds me of our reflection lesson from last week. All those tiny little shapes. If you just draw the shapes, it's like putting together a puzzle, and you'll be able to get all this texture just by drawing the shapes. So this is just like the glass, only it's not glass, it's a shell. All I did for the last few minutes here was simply add in some middle values, so you didn't miss much. I wanted to give everyone a chance to catch up and draw whatever they were drawing and get the basic colors. So I added a little bit of this yellow warm tone. There's a lot more to go, but I just wanted you to see how you're blending things over and top. The one thing you want to watch out for when you're doing this is, yes, we drew it in pencil first, but some of these lines are actually going to be white. So if you look at my conch shell, this is all a big white line coming straight down here. And I have this pencil line here that's kind of changing the dynamic of how that looks. So we're going to work on using the eraser to draw with, which we've done before, but now adding it in again. And then adding in the shadows by using the complementary colors. So where there's yellows, we'll be using purples. Where there's pinks, we'll be using greens, which are a tone of a darker green, a lighter green, whatever, which is going to tone down this pinkish red and make it more of a neutral. The first thing we want to do is get rid of some of our pencil lines if you're working in colored pencil. Now, if you're not, your pencil line is fine, but these graphite lines are really starting to stick out. And I've been using my eraser for a lot of these projects, so it's getting a little worn down. That's why I have my scissors. Erasers can be actual drawing tools. Sometimes you have to cut a piece off, like I just cut the top off, to get drawing implements. So the beauty of cutting your eraser is now you have a second piece that's smaller for detail work. But what I wanted to get was this beautiful sharp edge that you can only get with a brand new eraser or one that you've cut down. And I'm going to use this sharp edge to go right along that graphite line that I don't want, because it's giving me not the effect of this white conch shell. And then also areas that went completely white, and erase some of these lines out now that I have the color in. So as long as you don't blend in your graphite too much, you can get rid of some of the areas that are just graphite. Now down here, it's not so much a problem because this is going to align with this purple tone, but I am going to take it away from underneath here. Sometimes just eliminating the graphite line, if it's too, like, gives your drawing somewhere to go, somewhere to breathe, as you will. I'm going to erase that out here because I'm going to fix this up here. Okay, let's get started with some of the shadows. So, as promised, some of these shadows read as more of a purple tone. So I am going to use a violet colored pencil, but feel free to interpret at will. If you wanted to use blue, that would work, or a darker green. That would work too, but I kind of like this purple. It's giving me the effect I want to start to show depth, and that's what you're looking for now. Only focus on the shadows. Right now, that's all I'm doing. I'm not looking at the whole shape. I'm looking at one shadow at a time. Where do I see this shadow? And initially, it might look splotchy, but at the end, it's all going to come together, and you should have a pretty nice, interesting conch shell. So I see shadows here. This whole area up here is a shadow. I might also note we'll be blending a lot of this in, so that don't worry right now if you're seeing this and it doesn't look like it's blending, it looks like hard edges. You're at that stage where it's not all put together yet, but it will be. So have faith. Anyway. Okay, I think I've got most of my shadows in where I want them. I see a little triangular shadow here. I have this one. This comes down. Again, this lighter, but if it's still light and it's a shadow, then by all means add it in. And then here, I can take the same color purple and kind of give a deeper tone to the edge of the inside of this conch shell. If you wanted to use green, you can. Since I had added some yellows and some orange, purple is working as a shadow, but just to show you how the green will work, we'll take, here it is, sorry, a darker green, and go in over this. Ooh, and I like that. It's really giving me some nice depth to where I had some reds. Now, if it starts to get too green and colorful, we can certainly go back in and go over it again with the pinks and the reds that we were using. So I think, here's my red. If I go back over this again, there we go. It'll blend it in, so it's still going to read to the eye as red, but it's just a very dark and deep red. And I can even go over some of these purples if I want, you know, just to kind of blend things in a little bit so it doesn't look too splotchy. Even though there are quite a bit of shapes, there's a lot of white still in this conch shell too. Now, what I noticed is here, I still have this orangey yellow shape, and it's and then there's like a white edge. And we're gonna emphasize that later, but for right now, I'm just gonna draw this back in because I see I had to come out here and come down. Pretty much fill all this in with this yellow, and then go back over it with that pinkish color partway up so that it blends in. It's a good idea to leave the pencils out that you're using. That way you're not rummaging around for them and trying to find the right pencil and getting the wrong one that you didn't use before, and then things don't blend in as well. Although sometimes that can work too. I'm a big fan of serendipity, maybe sometimes picking the wrong color and it turns out being the right color. Okay, So here's where we are with the conch shell, and you can see we're starting to get some nice shadows and tones. Now what I can do is use the little piece of the eraser that I was drawing with or erasing with, and use this to get some of these nice little blended areas. Remember, if you erase lightly, it blends. If you erase heavily, it takes it away. So I'm just kind of going over this in different directions to try to simulate some of those beautiful reflections that we were seeing, and also to develop some of my highlights rather than using a white pencil, because now we're using white paper. There's really no need to use white pencil unless you want to, and you certainly can do that. But I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible and still give us a sense that we're somewhere on a really nice beach. All right, and then this here, just lightening up these graphite lines so that they're not too intense. Okay, this didn't take too long at all. All we have to do now, I'm going to go back in and emphasize my shadow here and here. And let's see, we have a little point that comes up here still. And then I'm just going to take this little edge out to the bottom of this little point here. So it's touching that little frame I made. Compositionally, when you're drawing something especially small, you could isolate it if you want. And like I said, Andy Warhol isolated a soup can. But in this case, touching any three areas of your background or the edge of your paper gives this a sense of place. So I could even come up here on this one and just bring this up a little bit and have it touch it. And that probably works a little bit better compositionally. I'm gonna add a little tone to my background. That's not making it an object. It's just gonna give it a tonal surface so that when we take this off and have a frame, we'll have a nice white frame. But the last things we're gonna do here is just give it a little more oomph on the shadows. And I'm talking to myself again as I'm looking at the areas of the conch shell that might need to be built up just a little bit more, just giving a detail. Like I'm seeing again up here on the top, this little point needs to be just a little pointier. And coming over here. It's also good to make sure your pencils are nice and sharp, whether you're using a drawing pencil or graphite. Just make sure that what you have is nice and sharp. And then I'm seeing things that I missed the first go round, which are some interesting shapes on the other side, and some of this really warm red color kind of coming back in here. And then more of a swoopy red color. Now that's a word, swoopy. Just kind of coming back down here to get the shapes of what's going on the side of the conch shell and blending all this in. And again, I'm leaving this white. That's kind of key because we do want to have that white area. There's a really pretty little sub shadow right here of a reddish color. Then I can go back in with my eraser as my corrector and really get this nice sharp edge, because that's going to be key in showing that this conch shell has a dimension and a shape. And where I colored in too much, I can go back in and get rid of most of that. So I'm developing a secondary highlight where I want it. Okay. I think that looks just about where I want it. I'm going to lighten this down here by blending. So here's my eraser as a blender. I'm just lightly erasing so that it lightened it out as it got down here to the bottom. And the same thing here, just to blend this in a little bit. Now, if you wanted to make this super realistic, you can use your blender and go back in, or your Q-tip, and just kind of soften some of these areas. So I think I'll do that for this part. Just kind of lightly merge all these things. Not much, just a little bit. And again, it's totally up to you how much you want to do as far as getting the merging of the shapes and things like that. Then we do one final look at this where there's some tiny little areas of whites. I'm using that super sharp point that I made by cutting my eraser, and any eraser will cut. If you're using a pink pearl, you can cut those. If you're using this, which is what's a Factis, F-A-C-T-I-S, my personal favorite brand of eraser, that way you can get a lot of nice tiny little detail areas in here. Okay, all right. I think that's good. And now what we're gonna do is lay in the background. So I can decide, do I wanna do a background that's a light color, like maybe a light yellow, and have this look like it's in the sand? Do I wanna go with like a bluish color, or maybe I just walked up on this seashell by the seashore and I'm half looking at it with the blue sky and sand at the bottom. So I think I'll go that route. I'm gonna take the light blue, and again, the more parallel your pencil is to your paper, the softer and more even your shading is gonna be. So if I held my pencil like this, I'm gonna get a lot of lines. If I hold it this way, and I'm doing it so light that you can barely see, and then just kind of going in circles around my shell, and I'm trying to figure out how far down do I wanna go. It's not a good idea to split things in half. That kind of makes it look a little too isolated and trapped. So I'll go 2/3 down with my light blue. And then the bottom third, let's see. Here's a good sandy color. It's a yellow ochre. So I'm just gonna take, again, very horizontal, parallel, to my paper, and just lightly shade this in. So I have a tone. You're not gonna see much difference until I take off this tape. Then you should see a difference. If I wanna go, again, another direction to just blend this in further, just go the opposite direction, and you can blend this in. Now, if you remember last week when we were doing the reflective surface, we remembered that there was a cast shadow. So since this is yellow, I'm just gonna give a little shadow underneath my shell. So it looks like it's sitting somewhere. And that just means kind of tracing around the edge of the shell, but not right up to the edge of it. Give a little space, especially where it might be sticking out. And this needs to be a little darker. It's funny the things that you see after the fact. Okay. Sometimes I like to just keep going back, and there's always more you can add in and things that you can see, but I'm gonna let this go and show you the big reveal with the tape. I took some time to refine a little bit more of the edges and erase some things out. I'm gonna show you how to do that in case you get to the point where you're looking at your drawing and you're like, there's something wrong in here. So I'll show you that. Then we got the big reveal with the tape, and we're finished. I always believe in making the drawing your own anyway, so everything is up for interpretation. But if you find areas that really just didn't interpret the way you wanted it to, like right here, I can see where there's a little more white than what I have. You can go back in with your eraser and erase out more than what you think you want. I can see that that cuts across here. Sometimes it's fascinating how we don't see shadows and highlights correctly the first time. There's a big highlight right in here. So I knocked this out higher and bigger than I probably would want. But then you can go back in with your pencil and make that area smaller. So it does become just these nice little highlights. I see a little shape in here. This is so much like last week's lesson, which I'm glad it kind of piggybacks on it. And then go back in and get those shapes and shadows that you were missing. But that way you have your little white highlights that we were losing the first time. And if there's a little shape here where there's a white shadow, just draw the edges around it. And then you can go back in and just erase that back out a little bit more. But okay, for the most part, except for right there, I think we're done. And you can see here I had to add one more little point, so I erased out, and now I'm drawing that point by using my colored pencil to add it back in as far as tones go. So I can make that nice little point by drawing back in. There we go. So I'm trying to interpret this point here, right here, although I wanted mine to be a little bit lighter. So that's it. And we have our little toned area. So if all goes well and my tape doesn't ruin this paper, we should be able to pull this off and have a nice clean edge. So far, so good. Here's hoping. Now, if you want to make masking tape less sticky, if you have some really sticky stuff, like right there, it's pulling the paper just a teeny bit, but not enough to matter. You can always take the tape as you're pulling it off and stick it onto a piece of cloth or another surface, or if you're wearing something made out of cotton, you can just stick it down on your shirt like that or your pant leg, and it'll take off some of the stickiness. Back in my college days, we used to use a masking material called low tack, which meant it had a less tacky surface than tape, and so it wouldn't stick like that, but it would stick enough so that you could get a nice clean edge. But there we go, it worked. Hopefully you can see this beautiful little frame. Now you can sign your work. Printmakers always sign down in the white. Drawing, you could sign it up here, wherever. And yes, this works for painters too. So if you wanted to mask off your canvas and then maybe paint this a different color later by masking on the inside of your painting once it's dry, that's another way to get a border and not have to pay for a frame. I love frames, but this is a good way to get the same idea. I hope this gave you an idea of what a one object drawing can be. And again, the subject matter's up to you. I'll have the conch shell down in the art room, and you're welcome to come down and get a copy for yourself. But if a shell isn't exactly what you had in mind, look around the house. Think about what you might want to draw. I was looking around and I found 3 totally unrelated objects, but they could each make a cool picture in and of themselves. Pair of glasses. You could have them opened, you could have them laying on something, they could be sitting on a colored surface. And again, last week's lesson was reflection. This is a good one to practice. I found an old toy that I had, a Matchbox, little double-decker bus. So I guess I got this in 1963, I think, so old toy. But a simple little toy drawn to the full size of your paper, that's key. We don't want just a teeny tiny little thing floating around on a huge sheet of paper. It's gonna get lost. Or maybe a gravy boat or a coffee mug or something else that you might have lying around. I'll show you some examples following of other artists' ideas that you could do for a simple one object. But I did want to show you one that I thought was particularly funny. Once when my daughters were home and we were doing a painting during Thanksgiving, I believe it was. No, it was New Year's Eve. And you can tell none of us had anything to do. We decided to each pick one of the dogs and draw how we saw that dog represented. Well, my one daughter liked how the dachshund always had the little like fish legs in the back or whatever you might want to call them. So she did this, which is simply her interpretation of one object, a dachshund. So if you want to do animals, they don't always have to be the portrait. You could find another part, maybe just a paw, or just the eye of a fish and the face of a fish. Those would be fun too. There's so many ideas. All you have to do is look around. You probably have something lying around at home that would be perfect for this project. I hope you enjoyed this week's adventure in drawing and painting and creating. Again, everything we do as a drawing can be reinterpreted as a painting. It's just to keep it simple for folks at home. Drawing is a material that everyone can have in mind. By the way, I just turned this upside down. If you turn your drawing upside down or your painting and it still looks good to you, it works, that's a good way to tell that you have your drawing and painting the way you want it. Till next week, Vincent Hall, stay safe, be well. If you're coming down to the Art Center, I will see you there. If not, I'll see you next week virtually on Anyone Can Paint, Draw, and Create. Have a nice rest of your week.